People don't know that the Democrats is the party of the KKK.
Yep.
People don't know that the Republicans are the party that freed the slaves.
Yep.
That boy is good.
Good and terrible.
Charles Spurgeon, a 19th century preacher, once said that discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. It's knowing the difference between right and almost right. This is the intersection where faith, politics, and culture collide. My name is Omar. Thank y'all so much for being a part. Please like, comment, and share. Now, church, we need to talk. So let's talk about something that happened to me this week. I was on my way home when I got a message from somebody I know who's a black conservative, and they sent me this video they felt like was straight facts. And it told me all sorts of different things about how the Democratic Party is bad for black people. And in case y'all want to know, this was the true Nick Cannon special. It gave you all the regular arguments you hear about the KKK and Jim Crow and the Confederacy, yada, and so forth. So, I've seen this stuff before and I was already ready to debunk it, but the real question that I wanted to ask him and kept asking him was, did you really research this, or did you just find a video that confirmed everything you believed and just sent it to me? And when I asked him that, I then got called everything but a child of God. So just to let you know, he basically said that I was a mental slave and that I follow every word from the Democrats, but say I'm a man of God. Aren't you supposed to have the spirit of discernment? He said the Holy Spirit needs to open my eyes, and then something about the end times. Then he said he loved me. So,
Right.
So I kind of want to use this video to take the time to go through this video with straight facts and show how it has more potholes than I-85. But this is not just meant to be a clapback video, even though it's going to kind of feel like it. I really want to approach what I feel like is a deeper topic, which is in 2026 with all the abundance of information out there, we tell people to do their research, but how do we research? How do we know if we're really getting the truth or if we're falling into all sorts of misinformation and disinformation? So the one thing I keep asking myself, the one thing that kept going through my mind this week is, are you researching or are you confirmation farming? If you're confirmation farming, all you're doing is you're approaching the situation already with a preconceived notion and preconceived bias of what it's supposed to be, and you're looking for articles and videos and data to back up what you already believe. So basically it's like a person or like a cop that's already assuming the person is guilty, and they have tunnel vision to only look for stuff that proves what they already believe. If we approach research that way, you will find articles and videos that tell you exactly what you want to hear. But the problem is you won't be in truth. You'll be in your truth. You'll be in alternative fact world with Kelly and Conway.
Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that. But the point remains.
Wait a minute. Alternative facts? Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
That's not what we want. We want you to actually be getting the truth, and no matter what we're talking about. So I'm going to go through this video and show how it is manipulative. It tells the person, which I believe is the person who sent this to me, exactly what he wanted to hear. And I believe if he truly approached this video in truth, he would have saw all the mess and all the holes that was in this guy's argument. But this isn't just about politics. We also do this in the body of Christ. Just last week, all it took was Bishop Younger to throw up one finger in the middle of service, and my social media and Facebook just blew up. You know, you've got oneness people over here, you got Trinitarian people over there, and instead of having a real discussion theologically about the essence of God, all we got was scripture farming. You know, so people were just arguing back and forth, and my heart is that whatever topic we're talking about, whether it's theological, dealing with the body of Christ, whether it's political, whether it's history, that we approach things from a perspective of, hey, let's go in looking for truth and let the facts and truth guide us, and not go in there saying, I already know what I want to believe and I'm just looking for stuff to confirm what I said. So we're talking politics, we're talking history with this video, but use it as a microcosm for whatever topic you need to discuss to make sure that you're not being misled and make sure you're not falling into disinformation. So let's get into this video, this straight facts video that I believe is straight trash.
Trash!
The thing that made this video so egregious in my eyes is that you can tell by the way that the information is presented that the guy who makes the video doesn't even believe his argument. And I'm going to prove it in what he says. So first and foremost, I'm going to actually show you bits and pieces of the video, but we're actually not going to start at the beginning. We're going to start kind of near the end, because every argument he makes at the beginning of the video, he actually counters it by what he says in the middle to end of the video. So watch this and catch exactly what he says, and I'm going to show you the problem with it.
The parties never switched. That is often repeated and regurgitated, but is not supported by historical documentation. What more accurately happened is that certain voting blocks within both of those parties switched. The ideologies of both of those parties and what they were founded on never switched places.
Okay, let me write that down. Certain voting blocks shifted. Okay. Which ones? You have someone who's smart enough to know that certain voting blocks shifted, but won't tell you which voting blocks shifted. Why is that? How is it that he can know that voting blocks shifted, but they're not sharing with you? Again, we're looking for truth. Which voting blocks actually shifted? It's almost like he knows which voting blocks shifted, but doesn't want to tell you because it actually destroys his argument. Why don't you share with us which voting block shifted?
So say it.
Say what?
Say the word you want to say.
I'm not saying that I want to say it. I'm just saying that I can't.
Sure you can. Say it. Say it right now. I will say it with you.
So I want you to keep in mind what he says. We're going to start with what he says right here in the end. Certain voting blocks shifted. Now, knowing that, we're now going to go back to the beginning to hear his argument. And I want you to keep that in mind. The question I asked you, which voting blocks shifted?
Why do I hate the Democratic Party for Black Americans? Here's some history you didn't learn in school. Democrats literally fought in the Civil War to keep us enslaved. Once they lost the Civil War, they opposed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, freeing all enslaved Black people, giving us equal rights and the right to vote.
So the first thing he's going to bring up is how the Democratic Party fought basically to preserve slaves. We're going to cede all that to be true because first and foremost, we know the Democrats were mostly related in the South. They obviously formed the Confederacy. They fought the North. We know our Civil War history. Of course, I want you all to really take note of this. This is very, very, very important. Let's look at a map. What are those Confederate states? I want you to take a look at all those states located in the southeastern portion of the United States. Now, for the purposes of this video, we will refer to these people as SEC Democrats, because you know in the SEC, it just means more. Also, we got to note something very important. I want you to notice not just what he says, but how this person makes their arguments. Notice that when they're talking about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, he actually presents a chart that shows what percentage actually supported and what percentage actually went against it. Notice he does that here, and take note of that because I'm going to get back to that later.
Once Reconstruction was issued by Republicans to integrate Black people into society, Democrats passed the Jim Crow laws. Yeah, you didn't know that came from Democrats, did you?
Now, the next thing he's going to bring up are the Jim Crow laws. Again, we know those laws very racist towards Black people. Now, here's my question. Where were the Jim Crow laws located? Well, I'm glad you asked. Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, Louisiana, Texas, Florida, Arkansas, North Carolina, Virginia. Let me tell you this. So here's the thing. Again, who fought to preserve slavery? Where were these people located? In the SEC country. These Jim Crow laws. His next complaint about Democrats. Where were these people located? Again, in SEC country. So I want you to keep that in mind. I'm not arguing whether or not these things happened. My question is, where did these things happen? Keep that in mind.
Once Reconstruction was passed to give Black people political power, the Democratic Party founded the KKK, a terrorist organization created to terrorize and to intimidate Black people from voting.
So check this out. I actually had to do this part a couple days later based off of new research that I brought up and just thinking. First and foremost, think about this person's first two arguments. Number one, that the Democratic Party is the party that basically fought to preserve slavery because they fought for the Confederacy in the Civil War. And number two, the Democratic Party is the party that basically founded the Ku Klux Klan. There's two major problems that's not really being addressed in what this guy's arguing. How can you make a whole thesis and argument based off the Democratic Party being the party that fought to preserve slavery in the Civil War, yet ignore the fact that it is Republicans today and this Trump administration that has fought to preserve the monument and statues honoring those same people who fought for slavery? Kind of doesn't make sense. You're more worried about what happened 160 years ago, and you're not worried about what the Trump administration and Republicans are actually doing today. I think you should probably be more concerned with what's happening today than what happened 160 years ago. Again, let's talk about the Klan. You talk about the Democratic Party being the party of Ku Klux Klan, but it failed to bring up the fact that it was the Trump administration who wanted the restoration of the statue in DC honoring Albert Pike, who historians have often associated with the origins of the Ku Klux Klan. So, which party today is honoring people associated with that same Klan that you're discussing? Once again, this is what happens when lazy, stale talking points fail to actually adjust to reality. But we digress.
After this, Democrats opposed the 1957 Civil Rights Act, the 1960 Civil Rights Act, and the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Though that act is accredited to Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the sitting president at the time, the majority of the opposition, even to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, came from Democrats.
Now, do you remember earlier when I told you to pay attention to how, when he talked about how the Democrats opposed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, he shows a chart? Here's my question. Where's this chart for this? Now, why is it that he showed a chart for the Democrats' opposition to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment freeing the slaves, but he does not show a chart for the Democratic opposition for these civil rights voting acts? Why is that? It's because what he's saying is not true. And even he knows it. Even he knows that he's being manipulative with his facts.
The lie detector test determined
That's a lie.
that was a lie.
Here's the bottom line, since this content creator is so manipulative and won't show you the truth of the information. Whether we're talking about the 1957, the 1960, or the 1964 Voting Rights Act, whether we're talking about the House of Representatives or the Senate, in every single vote that took place, more Democrats voted for civil rights than against it. It is the absolute truth, and this content creator knew that. That's why in the earlier situations, he showed you a percentage of the votes. He wanted you to clearly see that Democrats voted against it. He doesn't show it here because he knows it contradicts his argument. And anytime you purposely omit data, you're not trying to educate, you're trying to manipulate. That's the key. Every single vote, more Democrats voted for civil rights than against it. And while the opposition, almost all of it, was in the South, in the same area that did every single complaint. But the difference is that in this day and time, there's more Democrats than just in the South. They're in the North and they're in the West as well. They're a growing national party. They're not regional in the South like they were during the Civil War times. So it is very manipulative to look at the Southern opposition and label it as the Democratic Party as a whole. As every one of us as believers should know, partial truths are a lie, and that's what this man did.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Though that act is accredited to Lyndon B. Johnson, who was the sitting president at the time, the majority of the opposition, even to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, came from Democrats.
Notice, he can tell you the party that did KKK. He can tell you the party that did Jim Crow. He can tell you the party that fought against freeing the slaves. He can tell you the party that voted against the abolition. But for some reason, he can't tell you which party Lyndon B. Johnson's from. Lyndon B. Johnson just happened to be the president. Maybe, I don't know, was he asleep and just woke up and started signing stuff like Trump does? No. Any history will tell you that Lyndon B. Johnson played a key role in getting the 1964 Voting Rights Act passed. And what he does, again, to manipulate, it tries to minimize Lyndon B. Johnson's role in getting that passed. First and foremost, he seems to forget what party he's from. He can tell you the Democrats about everything, but somehow when the Democrat president is the one who signs the Voting Rights Act into law, he just happened to be the president. You see what I'm saying? Plus, let's get into even more history. It was Kennedy in June of 1963, again, a Democratic president, who gave a speech calling civil rights a moral issue and announced the framework for the 1964 Voting Rights Act.
We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay?
A Democratic president, and of course anyone who knows politics knows that it is the leader of the party, the president, that sets the agenda of the party. So even John F. Kennedy in 1963 was setting the precedent that the Democratic Party was going to stand for civil rights. He gets assassinated. Lyndon B. Johnson, his vice president, steps in and plays the key role in making sure that the civil rights legislation gets passed.
It is the effort of American Negroes to secure for themselves the full blessings of American life. Their cause must be our cause too. Because it's not just Negroes, but really it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. And we shall overcome.
So attempts to whitewash and minimize the role of the president, the leader of the party, in getting that civil rights legislation passed is again another example of how this dude's trying to twist history. This is again another situation what's bad, because he can't do that because he has to make it sound like all the Democrats were against it for his narrative. So again, to tell the truth, the presidents, whether it's Lyndon B. Johnson, whether it is John F. Kennedy, they set the standard that the Democratic Party, again, at this point, is bigger than just the South, that they were going to go for civil rights. And the South, again, was the one who went against it.
And I know what I'm going to hear now, but the party switched. That is a myth. Who do you think taught you that? Maybe the same people who spent their life oppressing you for hundreds of years, who are trying to make you disregard and forget about that history. The parties never switched. That is often repeated and regurgitated, but is not supported by historical documentation. What more accurately happened is that certain voting blocks within both of those parties switched. The ideologies of both of those parties and what they were founded on never switched places.
Okay. So now that we played all the way to that part, let's review. Now, the people, the Democrats who basically fought against, who fought the Civil War to keep black people enslaved, where are they at? They're in the South. The Democrats who voted against or were against the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, where were they at? The South. The Democrats who started the Jim Crow laws, where were they at? The South. The Democrats who started the KKK, where were they at? The South. The only opposition in the Democratic Party that was against the Civil Rights Act legislation, where were they at? The South. And now he says certain voting blocks shifted. So now I ask the question, which voting blocks shifted? So first, let's talk about some of the actual representatives and actual people in government that actually switched parties or left their party. Let's start with probably one of the most famous examples, Strom Thurmond. Strom Thurmond switched parties in 1964, saying the Democrats had abandoned the people. He's out of South Carolina. He became a senator out of South Carolina that switched from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. Next, let's talk about Albert Watson. He was also a representative in South Carolina. Again, where's this at? SEC country. He switched from the Democrats to the Republican parties and actually became the first Republican to represent South Carolina since 1896. Let's talk about Jim Connally. He was the governor of Texas. He actually opposed civil rights legislation, and in 1973 he left the Democratic Party to join the Republican Party. Let's talk about Trent Lott. He was a representative from Mississippi who also switched from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. Let's talk about Jesse Helms from the great state of North Carolina, who in my opinion ran one of the most racist ads in the history of television.
Needed that job, and you were the best qualified, but they had to give it to a minority because of a racial quota.
He was a Democrat that switched to a Republican shortly after the Civil Rights Movement. So yes, you do have people who post the civil rights legislation actually ended up switching from the Democrat Party to the Republican Party. But the one I want to talk about the most is Mr. George Wallace. He was the Democratic governor of Alabama. And he actually did not switch to become a Republican. What he decided to do was he actually decided to run for president as an independent candidate. And as he ran specifically because he was very against the civil rights legislation the Democrat Party went for. And even though he lost, he mostly carried almost all the South. What this shows isn't so much about actual people in office switching from Democrat to Republican. What it shows is how much the voters actually started to reject the National Democratic Party because they felt the overreach. How dare they grant these civil rights? How dare they vote for these civil rights? And it showed how voters in the South began to crack and began to go away from the Democratic Party. If you look at how they voted after the Voting Rights Act of 1964 was passed, 64 election, 68 election, beyond, even into the 90s, basically the only Democrat post them signing that civil rights legislation that had success in the South was Jimmy Carter one time, and then you had to go all the way to Bill Clinton in the 90s. Basically, from the civil rights legislation on, Southern voters began to reject the National Democratic Party, and it opened the door for Republicans to come in and start to court these voters. So those certain groups that basically migrated over, he knows as well as any, those Southern voters, they began to shift. Let's enter Lee Atwater. Let's make the closing case here. Lee Atwater was one of the main Republican strategists during the time who really came up with the Southern strategy. He was looking for ways to help court these dissatisfied Southern white voters who were very upset about the civil rights legislation being passed, who saw that they became disillusioned with their party. And he was one of the ones who started to make strategies to help bring in inroads with these voters, at least on a national level. And he actually, in his own words, are going to talk about the strategies that Republicans use to help woo over these voters. And I want you to hear this. This is not going to be Omar talking his opinion. This is going to be, you're going to hear him in his own words talk about the strategies of what he was going to use to help court these voters dealing with the issue of race. Hear his own words.
You start out in 1954 by saying, by 1968, you can't say it hurts your backfire, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me?
Now, because I got sense, I decided to block out some of this passage, and the parts that I blocked out is him using ninja, just for you to know. But the reason why I blocked that out is because I didn't want you to be so thrown off by him just so freely using the N-word, like he just didn't care. We know about the racist nature of these people. That's not the most egregious thing. The most egregious thing is the strategy he describes. He says, we're not going to just blatantly say these things. We're going to talk about them in abstract ways that will be able to appeal to these people without us being called blatantly racist. So instead of just using the N-word, we'll start talking and using coded language. That's not my words, that's his words. And by the way, who's this strategist? Not only is he someone that was big time in Republican circles, he was actually the campaign manager for George H.W. Bush in the 1988 presidential campaign. This is someone that was in the know. And he's laying out the strategy, not just of what Republicans did back then, but what Republicans are still doing today. Whether it's coded language about lowering taxes, law and order, fighting crime, make America great again. These great coded language still being used today to help court these disillusioned voters. So again, which party is the party that's bad for black people. My goal is to give you the truth. And ultimately the truth is, the people that did everything he complained about, where are those people voting now? The people in SEC country, the ones who did all those things that he complained about, how are they voting now? That might be something you want to think about. I'm gonna be honest with you, the Southern strategy, the appeal to these voters was not something that happened immediate. It took time. While there was an outward rejection on the national level, on the more state and local level, it took time for these things to work. But the more they appealed and the more they appealed, you got to where we are today. So ultimately, my goal is to give you the truth of what happened. I gave you facts, I gave you data, and I got you hear the man in his own words. Now, you can choose to believe somebody just randomly talking in a microphone if you want to, but I challenge you not just to look at me. You look at the voting records. They're readily available, and you'll see who supported and who didn't support. You look at the quotes. You look at the speeches given by John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson, and you just decide if they were just asleep at the wheel or whether they actually played a role in making these things happen. You go and look at the voting records. You know how the South votes. But did they all just move to the North and they all moved to California? No, you know that didn't happen. So again, these people who are giving out these talking points, they're giving out these talking points because they have an audience that wants to hear it. They're not giving them out because they want truth. If you truly want truth, you've got to look for the facts and let the facts decide where they go. You can't just decide, this is what I want to do, and just run with it. That's what happened. And this guy sent me this video saying it was straight truth. And I just hope to show you how much this video is straight trash. With that being said, when we approach theology, when we approach fact finding, when we approach history, we can't make this mistake of having a preconceived notion and just running with that, or we can end up being just as manipulated. Now, here's the thing that's really interesting. It took me hours to look up all this information. Hours. How easy would it have been for me just to take a video, just run with it, and just share it with a bunch of people? That's why certain people say that a lie can spread halfway across the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. Sometimes it's very easy to just click and send when it's something we want to hear. But we have to be committed to hearing the truth. Something else I want to point out too. In the midst of studying this, I was going across facts and data, and I actually saw a study that said that 70% of white Southerners identified as Democrats in the 60s, and by the time we got to the 90s, that number had dropped to about 30%. That would have been a great study, but I didn't include it. And the reason why I did not include it is because I could not find corroborating evidence. You finding one article that says something, but you can't find it corroborated anywhere is a tall tale sign that that thing may not be true. So just because you see a random article on Facebook that says something wild and crazy, stop. Take the time to go and research and see if that thing is true. Don't just share stuff just because it's the first thing you see on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram. That's how you end up sharing misinformation. Take the time to make sure stuff is true before you're sharing stuff around, because you don't want to be someone that shares stuff false. That's how this sort of stuff grows. We could be a more responsible, smarter generation that actually does truly operate in discernment and recognize just because something sounds almost right doesn't mean it's right. Just because something sounds almost true doesn't mean that it's true. Be people that's committed to truth. Be people that's committed to doing things the right way. We can all have our opinions, but when it comes to the facts, let's make sure we stand in truth. Thank you so much. I'm thirsty. I'm gonna go get me some water. Have a good day.